Ryan Reynolds is out there acting like he has everything figured out. And honestly, there was a time when I actually admired the guy. I thought he was sharp, funny, and different from the typical Hollywood celebrity. But lately, every time I hear him speak, I find myself asking the same question. Who exactly is this version of Ryan Reynolds? Because the person showing up in interviews today feels very different from the charming, self-deprecating star audiences fell in love with years ago. Recently, Ryan appeared on an interview with Tom Power, and what started as a conversation about media quickly turned into something much bigger. He began talking about how people consume information, how audiences skim headlines, share stories, and react before fully understanding the facts. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. Media literacy is a real issue. Most people would agree with that. But then the conversation took another turn. The deeper he went, the more it sounded like he was encouraging people to place their trust back into major media institutions. The message seemed to be that established outlets should be treated as the reliable source of truth, while alternative voices deserve more skepticism. And that's where I started raising an eyebrow. Because Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively have spent months benefiting from coverage provided by those same outlets. Take the reporting surrounding Justin Baldoni, Blake's co-star and director on It Ends With Us. One of the most talked about articles in this entire controversy came from a major publication, and according to arguments that later surfaced in court filings, questions were raised about communication between Blake's side and reporters before key information became public. That alone was enough to ignite debate. So when Ryan starts criticizing people for reading stories without thinking critically, some observers see an irony there. Because the biggest narrative-driving article in this entire saga was shared millions of times before many readers ever stopped to examine the details behind it. And that's where things become interesting. Because once independent commentators, legal analysts, and online creators started digging deeper, they began highlighting facts and arguments they believed weren't receiving equal attention. Suddenly, the conversation expanded beyond the original headlines. Questions emerged. Contradictions were discussed. Alternative interpretations appeared. Not everyone agreed with those interpretations, of course. But the point is that people started looking beyond the surface. And that seems to be the part many critics believe Ryan dislikes most. Not that people are sharing information, but that they're questioning the version of events they were originally handed. Now let's talk about a recent article that has reignited the entire debate. The piece focuses heavily on Blake Lively's legal position and discusses an important California statute that remains central to the dispute. The article presents the situation in a way that many readers found sympathetic to Blake's side. But critics immediately noticed something. The article describes portions of Blake's dismissed claims as falling away because of legal technicalities. That's the phrase that sparked discussion. Because when people went back and reviewed the judge's actual ruling, they found a much longer and more detailed explanation. The judge didn't simply dismiss issues based on procedural loopholes. He examined specific allegations individually, evaluating context, timing, and relevance. Certain incidents were determined to have limited significance. Others were found insufficient to support broader claims. The ruling itself was extensive and highly detailed. Yet many readers felt that complexity was reduced to a much simpler narrative. Then there is the ongoing debate surrounding the without malice question, which remains one of the most important unresolved issues connected to the case. Supporters of Blake's position point to communications they believe demonstrate good faith. Critics argue that the surrounding circumstances deserve equal scrutiny. And that's where another layer of controversy emerges. Questions continue to be raised about how certain communications were obtained, how evidence entered the public conversation, and what role various parties may have played behind the scenes. Some of those questions have even appeared in judicial findings, making them difficult for observers to ignore. Which is why many people believe the real story isn't just what's being reported, it's what's being left out. And that's exactly the problem. Because the more you look at the situation, the harder it becomes to ignore the questions that nobody seems eager to answer. Ryan Reynolds keeps encouraging audiences to trust the institutions, trust the major publications, trust the gatekeepers of information. But critics are looking at the same outlets and asking a very different question. Trust them based on what? Because when people started examining the reporting closely, they noticed something missing. Not a small detail, not a minor oversight. Entire areas of controversy simply seemed absent from the conversation. And that absence has become a story all by itself. Then there is the Time magazine discussion, which at first glance feels completely unrelated. But once you place it beside everything else, the timing becomes impossible for some observers to ignore. Around the same period that legal headlines were dominating entertainment news, Blake Lively appeared on one of the most prestigious celebrity lists in the world. Immediately, debates exploded. Was it simply recognition? Was it coincidence? Or was it another example of how influence and access operate inside Hollywood's media ecosystem? Nobody can definitively prove a connection. But perception doesn't wait for proof. Rarely does. And once people begin connecting dots, fair or unfair, those conversations develop a life of their own. Which brings us to what many commentators consider one of the most controversial developments in the entire saga: the creator subpoenas. Because this is the moment where the story stopped feeling like celebrity gossip and started feeling much bigger. Reports surfaced that Blake Lively's legal team sought information connected to more than 100 online creators, commentators, independent journalists, and content personalities who had discussed the case publicly. Questions about communications, financial relationships, and possible coordination became part of the legal effort. For supporters, it was framed as an attempt to uncover facts. For critics, it looked very different. They saw it as a powerful legal mechanism being directed toward independent voices who lacked the resources of major media corporations. And the debate intensified almost immediately. What's particularly striking to many observers is that some articles discussing legal weaponization barely touched that aspect of the story at all. The omission itself became another source of criticism. Because whether people agreed with the subpoenas or not, many felt they were significant enough to deserve discussion. And this is where Ryan Reynolds' comments about critical thinking suddenly circle back into focus. Because while he was emphasizing the importance of questioning information, many of the independent creators being criticized were spending hours digging through filings, reviewing rulings, analyzing timelines, and comparing claims against documented court records. They weren't relying solely on headlines. They were going through source material. They were reading the documents themselves, which creates a fascinating contradiction at the center of the entire debate. Who exactly is being careless with information? The people reviewing thousands of pages of filings, or the outlets reducing those filings into simplified narratives? Then another issue surfaced that received far less attention than some people expected: the Sony communications. Because unlike internet speculation, these discussions allegedly involved individuals with a financial incentive for the project to succeed. They needed cooperation. They needed stability. They needed both major parties working together. Which is why certain reported characterizations immediately caught public attention. When descriptions allegedly attributed to executives began circulating, critics argued they painted a dramatically different picture than the one being presented elsewhere. Whether readers agreed with those interpretations or not, many were surprised by how rarely those conversations appeared in major coverage. And once again the same question returned. Why weren't these details receiving equal attention? But perhaps the most surprising omission, according to critics, involves Ryan Reynolds himself. Because for someone whose name hovers over nearly every conversation connected to this controversy, his presence often feels strangely absent from major summaries of the dispute. The discussions about behind-the-scenes involvement, the reports regarding communications with industry figures, the claims about influence over project decisions, the speculation surrounding professional relationships and agency interactions. All of it exists in the background. Yet in some coverage, Ryan appears almost invisible. And that's where skepticism begins growing. Because Ryan Reynolds isn't just another celebrity spouse standing on the sidelines. He's one of the most connected figures in modern entertainment. He has enormous influence, extensive business interests, media relationships, and a public platform most people can only dream of having. Which means that when comprehensive narratives somehow manage to move through this entire controversy while barely acknowledging his alleged role, some observers stop viewing that as coincidence. They start viewing it as a choice. And whether that perception is accurate or not, that's the question continuing to echo through every new headline, every fresh article, and every new development connected to this story. Not what was included, but what was left out. And when you place all of those pieces next to each other, the picture starts looking a lot more complicated than many people are comfortable admitting. Because this isn't just about one article anymore. It's about trust, it's about influence, and it's about who gets to shape the story before the public ever sees it. One of the biggest reasons critics continue questioning the coverage is because of the lingering controversy surrounding reported communications between Blake Lively's team and major media outlets. When judicial findings begin referencing those kinds of connections, even indirectly, it naturally raises questions. Suddenly readers aren't just evaluating the claims themselves. They're evaluating the people presenting the claims. And once that doubt enters the conversation, it becomes difficult to remove. Which is why some observers believe Ryan Reynolds' recent comments weren't really directed at misinformation as a broad societal issue. They believe he was reacting to something much more specific: the rise of independent scrutiny. Because for years, large media organizations controlled the flow of information. They decided which stories mattered, which details received attention, and which narratives dominated headlines. But now thousands of independent creators are examining the same events in real time. They're reading filings, reviewing rulings, comparing timelines, cross-checking public statements, and perhaps most importantly, they're doing it without relying on celebrity access to survive. That's a significant shift. Traditional entertainment journalism often exists within a network built around relationships. Interviews depend on cooperation. Exclusive stories depend on trust. Access depends on maintaining professional connections. That's how the system has always worked. Independent creators operate differently. They don't need invitations to private events. They don't need approval from publicists. They don't need celebrity teams answering emails. And because of that, some critics argue they're harder to influence. Which is why many people believe the real conflict isn't between truth and misinformation. It's between controlled narratives and uncontrolled analysis. Then the conversation circles back to Time magazine. And suddenly another layer of the story emerges. Because recognition carries weight. When a celebrity receives a major honor or appears on a prestigious list during a period of intense controversy, people inevitably notice. Some see it as deserved acknowledgement. Others see it as strategic timing. And that's where perception begins doing what perception always does. Fills in the blanks. The issue isn't necessarily whether the recognition was earned. The issue is how it looks. Because public credibility becomes especially valuable during moments when credibility is under pressure. A respected platform offering praise can change how audiences interpret an unfolding controversy. That's why these discussions continue growing. Not because everyone agrees, but because nobody agrees. And in today's media environment, disagreement fuels attention. When you step back and examine everything together, Ryan's comments start taking on a different meaning depending on who's listening. To some viewers, it sounded like a thoughtful warning about digital literacy. A reminder to verify information and avoid jumping to conclusions. To others, it sounded like something else entirely. A reaction, response, a subtle pushback against people who refuse to accept the original narrative without asking questions. 'Cause context changes everything. If someone hears that interview without knowing anything about the surrounding controversy, it sounds reasonable enough. But if they're familiar with the lawsuits, the media coverage, the creator subpoenas, the public debates, the legal filings, and the growing criticism surrounding reporting practices, the same speech suddenly feels very different. The words haven't changed. Context has. And context is where stories either survive or collapse. That's why so many critics focus on the sequence of events rather than any single headline. They point to one development after another, arguing that each revelation created new questions that weren't being addressed. Every new document seemed to expand the conversation rather than settle it. And eventually, the narrative became harder to contain. Then there's the financial reality behind all of this, which often gets overlooked because it isn't as dramatic as lawsuits or celebrity feuds. Media is still a business. Publications are businesses. Visibility is business. Access is business. Relationships are business. The entertainment industry runs on networks of mutual benefit, and those networks influence everything from interviews to profile pieces to exclusive coverage. That's not necessarily corruption. It's simply how the system functions. But acknowledging that reality makes some people uncomfortable. Because once audiences begin considering those incentives, they start looking at coverage differently. They start asking why certain stories receive attention while others don't. Why certain voices are amplified. Why certain details disappear. And those questions can be difficult to answer. Supporters of traditional journalism argue that professional standards exist for a reason. They point to editors, fact-checkers, sourcing requirements, and institutional accountability. Critics counter that institutions aren't immune to bias simply because they are institutions. And that's where the battle really lives. Not in the headlines themselves, but in who gets to decide which headlines matter. Now, to be fair, there is one point Ryan makes that deserves acknowledgement. Social media absolutely has flaws. Misinformation exists. Rumors spread faster than facts. People share content without reading beyond a headline. That happens every day. The challenge is that once audiences lose trust in traditional gatekeepers, they start looking elsewhere. And that's exactly why this entire conversation has become so much bigger than Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, Ryan Reynolds, or any single lawsuit. It's become a debate about who controls the narrative when everyone suddenly has a platform.